Hey guys, we're the Golden State Raiders, a group of students across California working together to fight against book bans. I'm Anais.
I'm Elizabeth. And I'm Karyme. And today we're here with author Dashka Slater to discuss book bans and her experiences as an author. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Dashka Slater, and I am the author of The 57 Bus, which has been banned many places. And my new book is called Accountable, and like The 57 Bus, it's narrative nonfiction about an incident involving teenagers and hate.
So we know you started your career as a journalist, and can you talk about that a little bit, and then also how you got into writing novels in the first place?
So I started my writing career actually as a poet. And so when I was in college at Cal, go Bears, that's what I thought I was going to do with my life, was I was going to be a poet. And then I started, after I left school, I was confronted with this question of how does one actually earn money? And I discovered pretty quickly that I was a terrible employee if I didn't like what I was doing. And the only thing I really wanted to do was write. And people kept on saying, oh, you should try being a journalist. And I was like, that's not writing, because I was a poet. So I wanted to be creative. And then I was reading this free weekly called the East Bay Express that published these very long stories that were really beautifully written. And I had this whole obsession with lots of the writers, and knew all the bylines. And at some point it occurred to me, oh, maybe this is journalism and it's really creative and the writing is so beautiful and I want to do that. So I literally took a night school class from the editor of the paper. And before I knew it, I was writing regularly for them, and then became a staff writer and spent 10 years as a local reporter in Oakland, and then became a national reporter, mostly doing magazine journalism. And then I started writing children's books because I had a kid and I was sort of reconnected with my love of books for young people, which were the books that kind of formed me as a reader and as a writer. And in 2013, I began working on the story that would become the 57 Bus. And I was reporting that for the New York Times and mentioned to my agent that I thought it would be a great young adult book. And that was the moment when all of my careers kind of came together, because that book has, it's nonfiction, it's a reported story that I reported originally for the Times, but it's written in a more creative way and very much with young people in mind. And it includes poetry. So it's everything.
I know you said that you started with poetry, but do you remember the first moment that you discovered your love for writing?
I started telling stories from pretty much the moment I could talk. Like, my mom used to write down the stories that I would tell her. So I have some of those, and they're like, I was really little. And so I always wrote. I always told stories. I would, do the thing that all bookish kids do, where you fold up the paper and you staple it together and you make a little book and you write it and you illustrate it. So, this was all before the internet. So there was nothing to do except for what you could come up with to do for yourself. So for me, that was reading and writing and drawing. And so I don't remember kind of like a beginning, because it was something that I always did. But the more I did it, the more that sort of became my identity. And then, adults are like, oh, that's so cute, she's a little writer, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I'm a writer because people say so. But I will tell you that my first publication was this magazine called Cricket, which is, I think, a lot of Gen X writers, that it was the formative publication for us, because they had these contests at the back of the magazine. And it was a children's magazine and had great writing in it. And it had these writing contests every issue, and that I entered every time. It was like a writing prompt or a subject or something. And so every month I submitted. And eventually some of my pieces ended up being published in, as winners or of the contest. And then you get a little certificate that says you are a member of the Cricket League, you are a published writer. And I was like, see, I got the certificate. This shows I am that thing. I am a writer. So that's my villain origin story.
So inspiring. That's so cool that you were so interested in writing, telling stories at such a young age.
Yeah.
That's so cool. But going back to the 57 Bus, We know that's
Yeah.
its true story. So what made you want to turn it into a novel? Why do you think stories like these are important to tell, especially, and put them in books?
So here's what I always say when I talk to audiences of young people, which y'all qualify. So I'll say it to you. You all are about to get the keys to the whole thing, right? Like we're about to hand over the keys and say, you're in charge. This democracy is yours. Where do you want to take it? And when that happens, I want all of you collectively to have had the experience of being exposed to stories that reveal other people's perspectives, that confirm your own perspectives, that take you on a journey, and that ask you to think about complicated and difficult and controversial topics. And so the 57 bus, it's about race, gender, and justice. And I don't have answers. I have lots of questions. And I kind of say to the reader, like, here you go. What do you think? Like, what is this? Now you know about Sasha, who's a non-binary person, 18 years old, and is, targeted on the bus and set on fire. And now you've met Richard. Richard is a 16-year-old Black boy who has all kinds of stuff going on in his life and who set that fire. What do you think about these people, like when you learn their full story? And how do you think we should adjudicate something like this once you discover how complicated it is? And so to me, that's what all of us need to be participants in this democracy and to shape this system and to think about like, okay, what is justice and how do we get there? And what do I want it to look like? And how do I create a world that is safe for the Sashas of the world, but also safe for the Richards of the world?
Yeah, that's really amazing. I mean, it's one thing to see these things happening in real life, and then it's another to be able to turn them into a novel and truly almost immortalize those stories. Is there anything because I know Accountable is also about a true story that happened in the Bay Area. Is there anything when you see these stories happening? I mean, because things like this happen all the time. Is there anything in particular that you see these stories and you're like this, like that just sparks something in you that makes you decide you need to make that story in particular novel?
So generally, like where I get this feeling, it's like almost a full body feeling of like, oh my God, I think there's something here, tends to be if I feel like it's revealing of a deeper issue. There's lots of stories that are just like, wow, that's crazy that happened, or, that's bad, or that's good, or whatever. But it doesn't necessarily open up a whole investigation of something that people need to know more about or need to think about more deeply. And so I particularly like places where I find it's hard to land, that I can't have just a quick take. So with 57 bus, which happened in my neighborhood, of course, like my first reaction is, oh my God, this is so terrible. How could anybody do that? But when Richard was arrested, he's 16. I had spent the first 10 years of my career in Oakland writing a lot about Oakland youth. And I was just felt, also I had a teenager just a little bit younger than Richard. And I was like, boy, I sure do know a lot of dumb teenage boys. And, so not kids who are setting people on fire, but kids who do impulsive things. And so that sense of, I feel a connection with both of these kids. If I am a supporter of Sasha's, does that mean that I can't feel empathy or concern for a 16-year-old who's about to face the possibility of life imprisonment? And so that sense of like, I don't know where to land in this, to me, that's what gives me those reporter chills where I'm like, oh, there's something here. So for Accountable, which I happen to have a copy of right here at my desk, so I'll hold it up. It's the true story of a racist social media account and the teenagers whose lives it changed. And like 57 bus, it's from the perspective of more than one, in the case of Accountable, many. So kids who created the account, who followed the account, and were targeted by the account, and their friends and some of their parents and teachers. And, so all this whole community was affected by the impacts of this account. And my curiosity was aroused by this question of like, first of all, what the hell? Like, what on earth were these kids thinking? Like, how do you get there? Because they were targeting Black girls who were their friends. So as soon as I began to learn that, I was like, okay, there's more to this story than just like, these are bad kids doing bad things, end of story. But like, what is happening here? Why did they think it was okay? What were the dynamics in their friendship? And as the girls started telling me about all the stuff they let go by, then I was like, oh, this is really has a lot to do with the way that race is being joked about in a predominantly white and Asian school, and the ways that stuff is kind of not being examined in a space where people kind of think, oh, we're post-racial, right? Because this is just after the Obama presidency, and so everybody in that high school were kind of thinking like, oh, it's fine, we solved racism, so now we can joke about it, and it went to a very dark place. So as the more I investigated, the more I was like, there is a lot to talk about here. There's a lot to unpack, and that is what gives me that full body chills, where I'm like, okay, there's more than just a story of it's not a simple story. It's a story where there's a lot of things to look into.
Wow, that's so impressive. I really admire your ability to write about like the nuances of all of these situations. And that actually, I know the story of Accountable that actually happened in a couple of our fellow Golden State Readers school district. So they were super
Yeah.
local to that. So
Yeah. I like people often send me story ideas that are happening somewhere far away. And, I fly in to do stories, but I like it when it's local and I can just be, dropping in every day over a long period of time. Accountable was, 4 years of reporting, and 57 Bus was 3 years. And that's hard to do when you're flying in someplace. It's nice when it's local and I can drop in whenever I want, probably more than anybody wants me to be honest.
yeah, I mean, having a journalism background just, I feel like, really changes your writing and makes it really something special. It's really, really cool to read.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to make a little plug for nonfiction, because I feel like people think that nonfiction is going to be boring, but a lot of people don't realize how much more interesting it can be when it's a true story and you're like, what this actually happened. And I love writing nonfiction for young people and kind of showing the ways that it can feel just like a novel while you're reading it, but it's every single word in it has been checked and verified, and that there is absolutely, the story wasn't invented just to make you feel a certain way. This is the story.
Yeah, honestly, the 57 Bus is one of the books that changed the way I view nonfiction for me. I had always been like, oh, I hate nonfiction. I read that, I'm like, but it feels like a novel. Like, it feels real. It doesn't feel like encyclopedic. So it's really cool to read.
Thank you.
But we also know that as amazing as this book is, it's been challenged or banned in, I think, like over 9 states at this point, which is crazy to us. But do you remember the first time you saw that your book had been banned, or even any book had been banned, and just like how that made you feel and what that instilled within you?
Yeah, so I remember that reading about book bans and kind of having that reaction that I hear all the time, which is like, it's good for sales, like, cool, badge of honor, so I really thought that like, oh, if this ever happens to me, it'll feel cool in some way. And then it happened. Did not feel cool. And instead, I just felt incredibly sad that this book that I had put so much care into and was really, it's mission driven in that it's there to open up conversations and, hopefully, fight bigotry. But it's not saying like you need to feel a certain way, you need to believe certain things. It's, its job is to draw people into a conversation and into a process of reflection and thinking. And so the idea that all of that would be painted with this, very broad brush of, this book is trying to recruit people into, being trans, or this book is pornography, or, that's, not only is it false, but it's also like so far from the mission of the book that it just feels hurtful. So I was like, the very first one felt kind of silly because it seemed like a one-off, and it was like one mom, I think it was in Rhode Island, wanting to know why her quote was like, high school students should be learning cursive, and instead of reading this book. And I thought, cursive, I think you generally learn in 3rd grade, if at all. So like, I really hope that that's not the set of choices here. So it just seemed kind of silly, like somebody who was very out of touch. Little did I know that this was going to be like it was the leading edge of this huge wave. And as it became clear what was happening, that my book was just one of many, and that they were very specifically targeting books that were written by and about people of color, people who are somewhere in the LGBTQIA plus umbrella, that, that changes the whole thing. It's no longer like, haha, but this is the whole reason for being for people like me and many of us who write for young people, like our existential mission is being challenged.
I mean, obviously, all of us here know that books are important, but I mean, how do you think book banning affects our society?
It's really dangerous when you are inside a feedback loop and you can't hear perspectives that are outside of yours. All of us are limited in our understanding of the world, and particularly when you haven't yet even gone out into the world. You are, living in one place, going to one school, and, all of us, think that we're the main characters in the story, right? But part of growing up and developing is to realize that there are many main characters and there are many stories. And so when you close down access to that understanding, when you close down the ability for people to both see themselves reflected, but also see, have a window into somebody else's experience, then you're shutting down, empathy, you're showing down opportunities for growth. You're shutting down just the opportunity to be a good person in the world and, be somebody who gets that you're not the center of the universe, which all of us need to know. So, I don't think there's anybody who is a reader who hasn't had a book that just blew their mind and kind of expanded entirely their understanding of the world. And to close down that opportunity for anybody is just, it's so shocking and wrong.
What are the main reasons you see being banned, and like how does that make you feel?
The excuses for banning my book are always kind of hilarious because it's so obviously not true. So they often say that it's obscene or pornographic, which is hilarious because there's not even any kissing in it. Like there is no sex. Sasha is on the ace spectrum. Like this is not a sexy book. And so if that's what you're looking for, I feel like you're going to be really disappointed. There was one in North Carolina, they, in this one county, they dispatched sheriff's deputies to take the book and look through it and try and, determine whether it was obscene. And I just picturing these cops sitting there like paging through looking for the dirty bits. I'm like, that must have been so frustrating for them. Because it's, there's a glossary of terms for talking about gender and sexuality and romantic inclination, but it's about as sexy as reading the dictionary, right? So that's the excuse, is that it's inappropriate, it's and then the other one is that it is part of the homosexual or transgender agenda, which as I say, there's no agenda except for to tell a true story. And, you can try and deny that trans people exist, but I would say that the the evidence is to the contrary. They do. And so, it seems like a very odd thing to try and shut down, particularly for people who seem obsessed with trans people and like their entire lives are like trying to make life more difficult for them. So I don't know how you argue that they don't exist if you're spending so much of your time trying to make life hard for them. So those are the excuses. And mostly it seems like it's people who haven't read the book. What I find often is that when people do read the book, it's hard for them to make that argument. But, as you all know, it's these groups that are, organized. They're issuing templates for how to ban books, and the people who ban them are often just hearing about it on a website.
This is truly a problem. As an author of banned books, an author whose books has been banned, how do you think the viewers at home can help bring awareness and help combat censorship?
Well, this is such a difficult question because it's hard. Like often, I feel like we're fighting a phantom enemy because we often can't see them. But one of the most important things is to be paying attention to local races. A lot of young people are not yet able to vote, but they have influence in their families. And so, and they can still work for candidates and walk precincts and talk about the importance of books, go go to school board meetings, all of those things, because a lot of these folks come in, on the down low and they're stealth candidates. People don't vote in school board races. They're not voting in library board races. And so all of a sudden, these extremists are able to take over in a vote in a race that very few people paid attention to, and then they're in charge now. So that's one really important thing, is that people pay attention to the bottom of their ballots. The sexy stuff that is in the newspaper and on the news and everything is up top, but the stuff that affects your life is at the bottom. And then the other thing is to be affirmatively speaking up in favor of books, because when the only voice that a decision maker hears is the ban the book voice, then they live in fear. And one of the things I have a lot of concern about is the soft censorship, which is when a librarian doesn't acquire a book, a teacher doesn't teach it in their classroom or doesn't have it in their classroom library because they're afraid that there will be a problem down the line. And so they're just like, yeah, maybe not. And so one way you can fight that is by affirmatively saying, like, we want these kinds of books. We don't want to see books banned in our school or in our library or in our community. And, writing letters just like, I love this book. I'm so happy I got a chance to read it. Those kinds of things, letting teachers, librarians, administrators, principals, school board members, all of those, just let them know that the books are important to you and that you want access to them.
Yeah, I love hearing authors' perspectives to how we can fight book bans and what seems to be the most effective. And the self-censorship of librarians and teachers, that's something that people don't seem to mention a lot, but truly that's a major issue in itself. So
I
it's
hear
really
about it all the time, like so often. I hear, from booksellers when they're doing, they do educator nights where they kind of let teachers and librarians and, school people know that there's a new book. And, they tell me that they have these conversations where people go, oh no, I don't think I want to bring that into my school. I feel like, there might be a reaction. So, we have to help people have courage.
100%. Kind of on this token, are there any changes that you would like to see to how communities respond to controversial literature?
Well, everybody needs to take a deep breath, almost all the time. And just, that when there's stuff that's not for you, okay, deep breath. Somebody else, it's going to be for somebody else. And, and I would say that's across the political spectrum, that if we can all develop that muscle of, knowing that something that isn't for you doesn't mean it doesn't have value to somebody else. It's a good thing to learn. Practically, that means, making sure to be paying attention and to speak up and to defend the principle of free speech, knowing that sometimes means that you are going to hear something you don't want to hear. And, absolutely there are guardrails, there are things that cross the line. And so this is not a defense of say whatever, no consequences, but it is a defense of developing the muscle and the deep breathing that is required to hear stuff that, isn't your point of view, isn't necessarily what you want to hear or how you look at the world, makes you uncomfortable. We're all big enough to be able to do those things and survive it. And that's how the conversations happen. That's how you develop a pluralistic society where we can collectively make important decisions and collectively move along the line to get the things we want to have happen. Some of those conversations are going to be hard and difficult, and people are going to disagree, and you're going to feel uncomfortable, and your feelings might get hurt. And we're all big enough to be able to do that.
As we kind of wrap up this interview, do you have any advice or words of inspiration for young readers or aspiring writers out there?
The biggest one is just to read widely and with curiosity, and and particularly if you want to write, it's the best advice that I ever got from my first mentor, who was the poet Lawson Inada. And I was a high school student who was taking some community college classes, and he was like, "What poetry are you reading?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm mainly just writing it." And he was like, "No, you are part of a tradition. You are and just handed me a big stack of his favorite poets. And I had lived that ever since, that like, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to write, read that and read a lot of it. And, you know, one of the ways that we learn in anything is through imitation. And so, you know, whatever you want to write, read that, and then it's fine to imitate it. You know, fan fiction is an amazing way to learn how to write. And so is every derivative thing that people write when they're starting out, because that's how you know, just like painters learn by, you know, copying paintings. Don't copy, but do, you know, indulge your own fandom and write about the things that are like the things that you like. And then for readers, just to continue to kind of branch out, because of our algorithm driven lives, it's very easy to narrow and to just, you know, the algorithm is always going to tell you, if you like this, then you'll like this. And you can just kind of go the same. And so to constantly be pushing ourselves to read something that's maybe a genre that isn't your favorite, you know, or you haven't read before, an author that you don't know, or, you know, just you don't have to finish every book, but to try a lot of books.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. Thank you so much for that. That's all we have planned in terms of questions. I do want to give you the floor if there's anything you want to add, anything else you want to say to people. If not, no worries, but just wanted to give you that space.
Just, I'm so grateful to have the chance to talk to you and to other readers. And, you know, I have to say, we're in a dangerous time, and we are all going to have to be really good at defending freedom, because there are many people who have a high likelihood of having the power to restrict that freedom. And so we all have to, you know, just learn how to defend them and to speak up, because, you know, everybody's going to be needed to defend the right to read and the right to talk and the right to think and all of those things.
Thank you again so much for talking to us. It was really amazing to hear your perspective on all of this. I know I actually come across your articles quite often, being up in Berkeley. Like, I actually read your People's Park article a while ago and didn't even that it was the same person.
Well, I guess I should mention, I do have a Substack, and which is where that article was originally published, was in my newsletter. So if you type my name into the Substack app, or just into Google Dashka Slater Substack, it's called A Sigh of Relief, and talking about justice and accountability. So come on, join the conversation. Thank you all, and just keep up the good work. And I hope I get a chance to talk to you again.
Yes, for sure.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.